I didn't know my life would crack open in the middle of an ordinary morning, under fluorescent office lights and polite corporate smiles. But that's exactly how it happened. My name is Marina Anderson, and the day my father-in-law fired me for performance issues was the same day my husband handed me a list of homeless shelters, highlighted in pink. At the time, I was still trying to understand how I'd become the punchline in my own marriage. I was standing in a glass-walled conference room at Sterling Tech Systems, hands folded, posture straight, listening as Robert Sterling, my husband's father, explained why I was no longer a good fit for the company. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult me outright. He didn't have to. His tone did the work for him. Measured, final, satisfied. Effective immediately, he said, sliding an envelope across the table like he was closing a deal instead of ending someone's livelihood. I remember thinking how strange it was that my body didn't react the way I expected. No shaking, no anger, just a quiet stillness in my chest, like something had been waiting for permission to stop hurting. Security walked me out. 3 hours later, I was standing in my own kitchen. My husband, Daniel Sterling, silk pajamas, wine glass in hand, scrolling through his phone like the world hadn't just shifted, barely looked up when I told him I'd been fired. "Oh," he said. Then he smiled. Not the worried smile, not the supportive one, the relieved one. He reached into his designer bag, paid for with a card in both our names, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Homeless shelters, addresses, phone numbers, one circled with a star. "This one has free Wi-Fi," he said lightly, like he was doing me a favor. "Dad told me last week this was coming. I figured it'd be helpful for you to plan." That was the moment something inside me went cold and clear. Not because I was broke, not because I was scared, but because I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding for 4 years. I hadn't lost a job. I had lost my place in a family that never saw me as anything more than convenient. And what Daniel and Robert didn't know, what made that smile on my husband's face so painfully premature, was this. They hadn't destroyed me. They'd just triggered a sequence they could no longer stop. And everything they'd built, every assumption, every insult, every quiet humiliation, was about to come due. Before everything collapsed, before envelopes and eviction lists and that look on Daniel's face, I used to believe my life was stable. Not perfect, but solid enough to stand on. I was 36 when I married Daniel Sterling. I had a master's degree in computer science, a resume most people would have been proud of, and a quiet confidence that came from knowing I was competent, even when I wasn't loud about it. I'd worked at 2 mid-sized tech firms before meeting Daniel. Long nights, tight deadlines, the kind of pressure that teaches you discipline instead of ego. Daniel was different. He worked in branding and marketing, presentation, perception, optics. He knew how to talk, how to sell an idea, how to look impressive without ever getting his hands dirty. When we met, I thought we balanced each other. I was substance, he was shine. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party. I remember standing near the drink table, nursing a sparkling water, when he struck up a conversation about how underrated tech people were. I laughed, a little surprised. He listened. He asked questions. He made me feel seen. That feeling carried me for a long time. When he proposed, it was romantic in the way Instagram loves. Sunset, ring box, soft music, an audience just far enough away to feel intentional. I said yes without hesitation. That was when Robert Sterling, his father, entered my professional life. Robert owned Sterling Tech Systems, a cybersecurity firm that looked impressive on paper. Good revenue, clean branding, confident leadership. At our engagement dinner, after a speech about family and legacy, he clapped me on the back hard enough to sting. "So," he said, smiling like a man testing a boundary, "how would you feel about joining the company?" I was flattered, until he explained the role. Entry-level IT support, password resets, printer jams, basic troubleshooting. I had a master's degree, years of experience. But Robert made it clear, Working for him meant starting at the bottom. Earn your stripes, he said. What he meant was, know your place. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. It's just how Dad is, he whispered later. Once you prove yourself, he'll notice. I believed him. That was my first mistake. I took the job because I loved my husband and thought performance still mattered. I thought effort could overcome hierarchy. I thought merit was real. For 3 years, I stayed in that role. My days were spent fixing things no one respected. My name became shorthand for inconvenience. At company events, Robert would introduce me as his daughter-in-law who works in IT support. His voice carrying that subtle emphasis that reminded everyone I was several rungs below. Daniel laughed along. Once at a company dinner, he told a story about how I fixed his phone after he dropped it into a mimosa at brunch. Everyone laughed. I smiled and swallowed the discomfort because that's what you do when you're trying to belong in a family that treats you like staff. What no one noticed or cared to ask was what I did after work. I'd come home around 6. Daniel would be filming content for his socials, ring lights glowing, rehearsing confidence. I'd eat dinner quietly, then retreat to the spare bedroom with my laptop, and I coded. Real code. Ambitious code. The kind of code that doesn't ask for permission. I started building my own cybersecurity platform during my second year at Sterling Tech, an intrusion detection system that used pattern recognition to identify threats before they fully formed. Algorithms that could predict attack vectors from subtle network behaviors. I named it Secure Shield Technologies. I was careful, meticulous. I registered everything under a shell company using my mother's maiden name, Morgan. Patents, accounts, legal filings, all separate, all mine. While Robert mocked my position and Daniel joked about my usefulness, I was building something that would outgrow them both. They just didn't know it yet. If you'd asked me back then whether my marriage was happy, I would have hesitated. Not because I didn't know, but because I'd gotten used to explaining away discomfort like it was normal. Daniel didn't hit me. He didn't scream. He didn't cheat, at least not in the way people picture, with lipstick stains and late-night lies. He just diminished me, quietly, publicly, repeatedly. It started small, the way rot always does. At family dinners, if I spoke about work, about systems, about security flaws, about something I'd solved, Daniel would cut in with a joke. Marina could talk about firewalls at a funeral, he'd say, smiling like he was being affectionate. Everyone would laugh. I'd smile too, because reacting would make me sensitive. Robert would lean back in his chair, pleased, and add something like, well, thank God she's good with computers. Somebody has to keep the printers running. And the strangest part, Daniel would look at me afterward like I should be grateful he'd included me at all. On normal days at Sterling Tech, the disrespect wasn't loud. It was woven into everything. Executives wrote passwords on sticky notes and slapped them onto monitors. People summoned me with the impatience you reserve for waiters who forgot your water. Robert locked himself out of his admin account at least once a week. His password was literally Sterling123, and every time I reset it for him, he watched like I was performing surgery. Once, while I was typing in a new password, he chuckled and said, "Don't get any ideas. You're not the kind of smart that runs companies." I laughed politely, because that's what I'd trained myself to do, but my body didn't laugh. My jaw tightened. My hands went colder on the keyboard. My mind quietly filed the moment away. And Daniel saw it all. He just never intervened. Sometimes he'd even join in. At board dinners, Robert loved making me the punchline. One night, in front of clients, he raised his glass and said, "Marina's great with computers. She's basically my personal tech support." Laughter rippled across the table. Daniel added, "Yeah, she even fixes my laptop when I get too many pop-ups from shopping sites." More laughter. I sat there, smiling, chewing too slowly, feeling the heat creep up my neck. I remember staring at my fork, thinking about how easy it was for them to reduce me into something small. Then I'd go home and code until midnight, because if the day belonged to them, the night belonged to me. The conflict didn't just live at work, it lived inside my marriage. Daniel became increasingly obsessed with appearances. We couldn't just be married, we had to look like the right kind of couple. He'd ask me to come to parties and then leave me stranded socially while he worked the room. If I didn't smile enough, he'd hiss later, "You make things awkward." If I wore something simple, he'd say, "Can you at least try? My family notices these things." And the more I kept myself quiet to keep the peace, the bolder he got. One night, I overheard him on the phone with his friends. "I mean, she's stable," he said, "reliable, but she's not exactly exciting. She's like an insurance policy." The words weren't meant for me, but they landed anyway. I stood in the hallway, holding a glass of water, listening to my own pulse pound in my ears, waiting for him to say something kinder, something that proved I'd misheard. He didn't. That was when my mind started rewinding through old memories with a different lens. The engagement dinner where Robert offered me an entry-level job like it was charity. The way Daniel never corrected him. The little jokes that always had me as the punchline. The way Daniel's love seemed conditional on my usefulness. And still, I stayed. Because hope is stubborn. Because I thought if I just worked harder, proved more, kept my head down, they would eventually respect me. But respect was never the goal for them. Control was. And the air in our life, at home, at work, at every family gathering, was slowly thickening with something I couldn't name yet. Not betrayal. Not yet, but the seed of it was there, growing quietly, waiting. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Subject line, performance review, mandatory attendance. I remember staring at it longer than necessary, my coffee cooling beside my keyboard. Annual reviews weren't unusual. I'd had them every year. Always solid, always documented. My team had prevented multiple breaches, optimized internal systems, improved response times by nearly half. So I told myself not to overthink it. That was the last moment of innocence I had. I arrived 15 minutes early, like always. The conference room felt wrong. The chairs were arranged more formally. The blinds were half drawn. At the head of the table sat Robert. To his right, Tracy from HR. To his left, 2 board members I barely interacted with. No one smiled. I took my seat, folding my hands in my lap, spine straight, heart steady in a way that felt artificial, like my body was bracing before my mind caught up. Robert didn't waste time. "Marina," he began, shuffling papers that didn't look used. "We've reviewed your department's performance." I waited. "Unfortunately," he continued, "the results are not meeting our expectations." The words didn't land at first. They floated, weightless. "We've decided to terminate your employment due to performance issues," he said. "Effective immediately." There it was. I felt it then, a pressure behind my eyes, a hollowing in my chest, like the room had suddenly lost oxygen. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Not because I didn't have a defense, but because I understood something, finally. This had nothing to do with performance. Tracy slid an envelope across the table. My name was typed at the top of the termination letter in crisp black font, impersonal and final. "Security will escort you out once you clear your desk," Robert added, his tone almost bored. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and nodded once. As I walked toward the door, I caught Robert's reflection in the glass wall. He was smiling. Not politely, not awkwardly, satisfied. Like he'd just won something. That smile followed me all the way to the elevator, down through the lobby, out the glass doors. I handed over my badge and stepped into the daylight feeling strangely calm, like something inevitable had finally happened. The drive home was quiet. My phone buzzed with automated HR messages I didn't read. Traffic moved around me like the world hadn't noticed anything change, but I had. When I walked into the house, our house, it was barely 11 in the morning. Daniel was at the kitchen counter in silk pajamas that cost more than my first car. Wine glass, phone in hand. He glanced up briefly. "You're home early," he said flatly. I got fired, I replied. Performance issues, apparently. I waited. For surprise. For anger. For concern. Instead, his face lit up. Relief, excitement, almost gratitude. He reached into his designer bag, the one bought with our shared card, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. Homeless shelters, addresses, highlighted in pink. One circled with a star. This one has free Wi-Fi, Daniel said lightly. Dad told me last week this was probably coming. I figured I'd help you plan. The room went very quiet. My ears rang. My fingers trembled around the paper. I stared at the list, then at him, searching his face for any sign this was a joke. It wasn't. My friends are all moving forward, he continued casually. Brand deals, marrying men with real careers, and I'm stuck with an IT support girl who couldn't even keep her job at my dad's company. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, cleanly. So, you're not even going to try to work this out? I asked. He laughed. Work what out? You're unemployed. What exactly do you bring to this relationship now? I went upstairs, packed a duffel bag, came back down. Daniel followed me to the door, still smiling, still entertained. Where do you think you're going? He asked. You don't have a job. You don't have money. I met his eyes. I'm going to find some peace, I said. You should try it sometime. You'll come crawling back, he called after me as I walked to my car. You have nowhere to go. I didn't respond, because for the first time in 4 years, I knew exactly where I was going. The strange thing about leaving isn't the noise, it's the quiet that follows. I expected my hands to shake as I drove away, expected tears to blur the road, my chest to tighten, my mind to spiral. Instead, there was a calm so deep it scared me more than panic ever could. Like my body had already accepted what my heart was still catching up to. I drove for nearly 40 minutes without direction, the city unfolding around me in familiar streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I'd stepped out of a life that no longer recognized me. At a stoplight, I noticed my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked clear, not happy. Not numb. Clear. That clarity hurt, because clarity meant there was no misunderstanding left to cling to. Daniel hadn't said those things in anger. Robert hadn't fired me impulsively. They'd planned this. And part of me, quiet, ashamed, honest, knew I'd sensed it coming. I pulled into a modest apartment complex across town. Nothing impressive. Beige walls, narrow balconies, the kind of place no one posts online. I walked into the leasing office, paid 6 months upfront in cash, and signed the paperwork with a steadiness that surprised even me. When the door closed behind me in that one-bedroom apartment, bare furniture, scuffed floors, walls that had lived other lives, I leaned back against it and exhaled. Mine. No marble counters, no designer furniture, no audience, just silence. The first night, I didn't unpack. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, knees pulled to my chest, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. My phone buzzed constantly. Emails from Sterling Tech HR about exit procedures, equipment returns, documentation. I didn't open any of them. Instead, my mind replayed moments I'd buried. Daniel laughing while his father diminished me. The way he'd looked relieved when I said I'd been fired. The pink highlights on that list. Dad told me last week. A week. 7 days where he could have warned me, prepared me, stood up for me. Instead, he prepared my exit. I didn't cry that night. I didn't cry the next morning either. I woke early, made coffee, and stood by the window watching the city move below me. People walking dogs, cars honking, a woman arguing on her phone. Life, uninterrupted. I felt like I was watching someone else's movie. On the 4th day, I called Danny. We'd been friends since grad school, one of the few people who knew about Secure Shield. He picked up on the second ring. They actually fired you, he said, after I told him everything. After all the work you did? Yes. And your husband gave you a list of homeless shelters? Yes. Silence stretched on the line. So, Danny finally said carefully, "What's the plan?" I stared at the light spilling across my kitchen floor. "I'm going to let them destroy themselves," I said quietly. The Secure Shield license renewal was due in a week, and I wasn't renewing it. Danny let out a low laugh. They have no idea what's coming. Before doing anything else, I logged into our joint accounts. Daniel had already spent $300 at a boutique that morning. I froze every shared card, every shared account. No announcement, no warning, just facts. Then I opened old files, records I'd kept from my time at Sterling Tech. Admin access Robert had never revoked because he didn't think I mattered enough to be dangerous. That assumption was about to cost him everything. As I sifted through financials, something stood out. Quarterly payments, large ones, to a company called Sterling Creative Solutions, LLC. No contracts, no invoices, no documentation. Registered owner, Daniel Sterling, my husband. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening ease. While Robert belittled me for 3 years, while Daniel mocked my worth, they were funneling company money into Daniel's personal business. I documented everything. Every transfer, every date, every missing paper trail. By the time the Secure Shield renewal date arrived, I wasn't angry anymore. I was precise. I logged into my licensing portal and clicked Decline Renewal. 1 click. That was all it took. Within hours, error logs started flooding in. Firewalls failed. Security protocols collapsed. Client systems began glitching. I cooked dinner calmly while the company that had treated me like nothing began to unravel. And for the first time since I'd walked out of that house, I felt grounded, not vengeful. Ready. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It started with confusion. Within 4 hours of the license expiration, Sterling Tech's internal dashboards began flashing warnings. Authentication failures, latency spikes, security handshakes timing out. Their IT department, people I'd trained, people who'd once relied on me, scrambled to isolate the issue. By evening, confusion turned into panic. I could see it all unfolding through the monitoring systems I still had access to. Error logs stacked on top of each other like falling dominoes. Emergency meetings scheduled and rescheduled. Outside consultants being looped in, then quickly overwhelmed. I ate dinner slowly, tasting every bite. The next morning, my phone started ringing. Unknown numbers. The company's main line, Robert's office extension. I didn't answer. By noon, Robert's executive assistant left a voicemail. "Marina, this is Sarah from Mr. Sterling's office. We're experiencing some technical difficulties, and we're wondering if you might have time to consult on the issue. Please call us back as soon as possible." The phrasing made me smile. Might have time. Consult. I waited an hour before returning the call. Sarah answered on the first ring, her voice tight. "Thank God. We really need your help. The entire security system is malfunctioning, and our IT team can't." "Have them submit a support ticket through the employee portal," I said gently. There was a pause. "The employee portal isn't working either," she whispered. "That's unfortunate," I replied. "Good luck." I hung up. Day 2. Sterling Tech's internal chaos spilled outward. A junior developer named Tyler ran into me at the grocery store. He looked wrecked, dark circles under his eyes, same shirt I'd seen him wear days earlier. "Marina," he said, gripping his cart like it was holding him upright. "It's insane at the office. Everything's failing. Client data's inaccessible. Robert's losing his mind. They're bringing in consultants from 3 different firms." I picked up a box of cereal, considered it, then placed it in my basket. "That sounds stressful," I said. "Hope they figure it out." "You always said they didn't invest enough in redundancy," he muttered. "Guess you were right." I guess so. By day 5, the media noticed. Sterling Tech Systems experiences major outages. Stock falls 11%. The headline blinked back at me from my phone as I sipped coffee by my window. I had over 100 missed calls by then. Robert alone had called more than 40 times. Daniel, my husband, had tried 15, probably because the credit cards still weren't working. That afternoon, I sent one email. Polite, professional, final. Dear Miss Patterson, I appreciate your continued outreach regarding the current system instability at Sterling Tech. Unfortunately, I'm unavailable for consulting at this time due to other commitments. However, I'd be happy to refer you to several capable IT firms once my schedule allows. Warm regards, Marina Anderson, founder, Secure Shield Technologies. I signed it with my real title. It felt clarifying. By day 7, Robert called from a personal number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Marina, he said, and the confidence I'd known for years was gone. His voice sounded thin, tired, desperate. We need to talk. Firing you was a mistake. I let the silence stretch. These system failures, he continued quickly, they're not normal. Maybe there's something you can help us fix. I could potentially help, I said slowly, but that would require revisiting my employment terms, compensation, respect. He exhaled hard. Name your price. I'll think about it, I replied, and hung up. Instead of calling him back, I compiled my files, the transfers to Daniel's company, the missing documentation, other irregularities I'd ignored for years, and I sent everything, anonymously, to the Securities and Exchange Commission. By the time the investigation went public, Sterling Tech was already bleeding. Their website crashed. Their stock continued falling. Tech news sites ran daily speculation pieces, and my phone finally went quiet. Because escalation isn't loud when it's inevitable. It's slow, methodical, unstoppable. And somewhere between the silence and the headlines, I realized something important. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was directing. Power looks different when you're alone with it. From the outside, everything probably looked clean, controlled. Headlines, falling stock prices, missed calls I never returned. But inside that quiet apartment, with the city humming below and my phone finally silent, something heavy settled in my chest. This was the part no one talks about. Not the victory, not the revenge. The space in between, where the noise fades and you're left alone with what you've lost. It hit me late one night. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, laptop closed, lights off, only the glow from the street lamps bleeding through the blinds. My reflection stared back at me in the dark screen, older than I remembered. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I had won every move so far. So why did it feel like something inside me was breaking anyway? My phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. Daniel. I didn't listen at first. I let it sit there, that familiar name pressing against a boundary I'd finally learned how to hold. But the silence in the room was too loud. My thoughts circled back to moments I hadn't let myself feel yet. The wedding day. The vows. The version of myself who believed partnership meant protection. I pressed play. Marina, Daniel's voice came through, strained, unfamiliar. I don't understand what's happening. The cards don't work. Dad's under investigation. People are calling me, saying things. You need to call me back. No apology. No concern for me. Just panic. I deleted the voicemail. And then, unexpectedly, I cried. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet tears sliding down my face. Shoulders shaking as years of swallowed humiliation finally found a way out. I cried for the woman who thought love meant endurance. For the nights I stayed quiet to keep peace that never existed. For the part of me that still wished Daniel would have chosen me, even at the end. That was the lowest point. Not when I was fired. Not when I was handed that list. But when I realized I had stayed far longer than love ever asked me to. The next morning, I didn't get out of bed right away. I stared at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing, feeling the weight of what came next. Because dismantling someone else's power is one thing. Rebuilding yourself is harder. For a moment, a dangerous one, I wondered if I'd gone too far. If letting everything burn meant I'd scorched parts of myself I couldn't get back. if proving my worth through collapse still tied me to them in ways I didn't want. That was the darkness. Not regret, but doubt. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Danny. "You okay?" I typed back slowly. "I think this is the part where it hurts the most." He replied almost instantly. "That means you're past survival. Now you get to choose who you are without them." I set the phone down, closed my eyes, and for the first time since everything started, I didn't think about Robert. I didn't think about Daniel. I didn't think about Sterling Tech. I thought about myself. Who I was before I learned to shrink. Who I'd been becoming quietly in the dark. Who I wanted to be now that no one else was holding the pen. The darkness didn't disappear, but it loosened. And in that looseness, fragile, uncertain, real, I felt the first shift, not toward revenge, toward release. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, through clarity. 3 weeks after my termination, an email landed in my inbox with a subject line so carefully worded it practically trembled on the screen. "Request for meeting. Urgent business matter." It was from Sterling Tech's board of directors, not Robert. The board. They wanted to discuss resolving ongoing technical difficulties and exploring consulting arrangements. The language was neutral, almost pleading. Every sentence bent toward cooperation. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Thursday, 2 p.m. That was all I wrote. Thursday came, and I dressed deliberately. Navy suit, clean lines, the same one I'd worn at my wedding. Not out of sentiment, but because I refused to let that chapter own anything else. Walking back into the Sterling Tech building felt surreal. The glass doors slid open, and the lobby smelled the same. Polished floors, recycled air, but the power dynamic had shifted. The receptionist did a visible double take. "Ms. Anderson," she said, startled. "I'll notify the executive team." Within minutes, Sarah appeared to escort me upstairs. She looked exhausted, phone buzzing in her hand like it had become part of her nervous system. "They're all in the main conference room," she said. "Everyone's very eager." The room was full. Robert sat near the middle now, not at the head. Tracy from HR was there, eyes fixed on her notepad. 4 board members lined the table, faces tight with concern. I took the seat at the head of the table. Robert opened his mouth, closed it again. I set my briefcase down and opened it, laying out 3 folders, neat, labeled, precise. "Before we discuss solutions," I said calmly, "we need to establish facts." I walked them through the licensing agreement, the renewable terms, the ownership structure, the expiration date, 3 weeks prior. Silence thickened as understanding settled in. Approximately 70% of Sterling Tech's infrastructure runs on software owned by Secure Shield Technologies, I continued. "That's my company. You licensed it. You don't own it." A board member, Richard, leaned forward. "You're telling us our core security framework isn't ours?" "That's correct." Robert's face flushed. "You deceived us." "No," I said evenly. "I honored the contract you signed. Reading it thoroughly was your responsibility." Then I slid the second folder across the table. "And while we're discussing accountability, there are approximately $1.2 million in transfers from Sterling Tech to Sterling Creative Solutions, LLC. No contracts, no invoices, no deliverables." Tracy went pale. "That company is registered to Daniel Sterling," I added, "my husband." The room went still. "Those records," I said, "were also submitted to federal authorities 2 weeks ago." Robert looked like the floor had dropped out from under him. The vote didn't take long. By corporate bylaw, any party controlling critical intellectual property had standing to call for emergency review. The evidence was documented. The risk was existential. Robert was suspended pending investigation. When the meeting ended, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. "You think you've won?" he asked quietly. "I don't think I've won anything," I replied, gathering my folders. "I think I stopped letting you decide my worth." Outside the conference room, I ran into Daniel. He looked perfect, as always, and panicked. "What did you do to my father?" he demanded. "I told the truth," I said. "What happens next isn't up to me." "You're destroying our family." "No," I replied. "Your family destroyed itself. I just stepped out of the way." I walked past him to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing. I was choosing. The fallout didn't roar. It cascaded. Within days of the board's decision, the story broke wide open. Not the sanitized press release version, leadership transition, internal review, but the real one. Federal investigators confirmed an active probe. Tech journalists connected dots that had been deliberately blurred for years. Stock analysts stopped hedging their language. Sterling Tech CEO suspended amid federal fraud investigation. Security firms' crisis deepens as core systems remain offline. Every headline felt heavier than the last, not because I enjoyed them, but because they made something painfully clear. The truth doesn't need a megaphone when it finally gets daylight. Robert disappeared from public view almost immediately. No more confident interviews, no keynote appearances, just silence and legal counsel. Board members distanced themselves. Old allies stopped returning calls. The man who once introduced me as just IT support was now a liability no one wanted photographed standing next to. Sterling Tech's clients followed quickly. Contracts paused, then terminated, then quietly migrated elsewhere. Their reputation, built on the promise of security, collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Daniel's world fell apart faster. The frozen cards were the first shock. Then the sponsors vanished. Emails marked termination of partnership, phrased politely, decisively. His social feeds turned hostile. The same people who'd applauded his lifestyle pivoted overnight, comments sharp, unforgiving. He stopped posting. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he tried to spin it, misunderstanding, family issue, temporary setback. But perception, once cracked, doesn't reset on command. I never contacted him. Not to gloat, not to explain, not to close the loop. Because closure isn't something you ask from people who never offered you dignity. Sterling Tech's board reached out again, this time formally, carefully, asking to stabilize operations under revised terms. We negotiated licensing that reflected reality: ownership, accountability, transparency. No personal leverage, no theatrics, just business. And while everything around them unraveled, my life did something unexpected. It steadied. I relaunched Secure Shield Technologies openly. No shell companies, no shadows. I hired 6 former Sterling Tech employees first. Good people, undervalued, tired of being ignored. We worked out of a small office with mismatched chairs and a whiteboard that squeaked, but the energy was honest. We landed a government contract within 3 months, not because of spectacle, because the product worked. I started a scholarship program named after my mother, the Morgan Initiative, to fund coding education for students who didn't have connections or safety nets. Watching those applications come in reminded me why I built anything in the first place. 6 months after everything began, the final pieces fell into place. Robert accepted a plea deal, heavy fines, a permanent ban from executive leadership in public companies. Sterling Tech was sold to a larger firm that quietly kept our licensing agreement because replacing it would cost millions. Every quarter, an automated payment lands in my account. No fanfare, no revenge speech. Just a line item. That's not revenge, that's consequence. And through it all, I walked away without raising my voice, without chasing validation from the people who never meant to give it. I left them to the truth, and the truth did the rest. 6 months after everything collapsed, my life didn't look dramatic. It looked quiet. And for the first time, that quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. I woke up early most mornings, not because anxiety dragged me out of sleep, but because I wanted to start the day. I'd make coffee, stand by the window, and watch the city stretch awake. No rehearsed conversations in my head. No mental calculations about how to make myself smaller to fit someone else's comfort. At work, people listened when I spoke. Not because of my title, but because what I said mattered. Secure Shield grew steadily, intentionally. No inflated promises, no hollow branding. Just good work done by people who respected each other. The Morgan Initiative filled a part of me I hadn't realized was empty. Reading applications from students who reminded me of who I used to be, capable, underestimated, hungry to prove something, grounded me. When one of them emailed to say, "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did," I had to step away from my desk and breathe. That message meant more than any headline ever could. Daniel called once. I didn't answer. Later, he left a voicemail. His voice was different, quieter, stripped of its confidence. He didn't ask to come back. He didn't apologize the way people do when they want absolution. He just said he finally understood why I left. I archived the message, not deleted. Some things aren't meant to be revisited, but they're worth remembering as markers of how far you've come. People sometimes ask if I'm happy now. The honest answer, yes. Not because Robert lost his company. Not because Daniel lost his image. Not because I won. I'm happy because I stopped letting other people define my value. I learned the difference between revenge and reconstruction. Revenge is loud. It keeps you anchored to the past. Reconstruction is quiet. It's forward-facing. It's deliberate. The best response to people who try to make you feel small isn't to shrink them in return. It's to build something so meaningful that their opinions become irrelevant. My father-in-law fired me for performance issues. My husband handed me a list of homeless shelters. They thought they'd left me with nothing. What they actually did was remove every excuse I had for not choosing myself. They burned down the life I was settling for and forced me to build the one I was meant to have. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is just the moment you stop lying to yourself. I'm on the other side now, and from here, the view is absolutely incredible.